Hello there, ladies and gents. Great to see you again, and welcome back to Advance Your Wealth with Homer Smith. I'm Ryan Ruff, your moderator, but of course, I've got Homer Smith joining me in just a moment. We're going to be unpacking another wealth management discussion, but we also have an awesome guest that carved some time out of their day to be with us on the podcast here today. Today, we have Mr. Chad Jenkins. Chad is the CEO and the founder of SeedSpark. We're going to get into the intersection of Homer and Chad's worlds, respectively speaking. But a little bit about Chad and SeedSpark. They do a phenomenal job of creating exponential growth in value in the companies that they work with by helping them remove a film, so to speak. And we'll talk about that film exactly. That's kind of blurring their vision as a company so that they can begin to see the real opportunities for growth, for collaboration, and for the changes that will lead ultimately to the growth that any company wants to see in their lifespan. Before we bring Chad on and get into the nitty gritty of all that, let's go ahead and say hi to Homer. Homer, good to see you today. How you doing?
Hey, Ryan, good to be here as always. Excited to bring Chad on to the show today. Had a great conversation with him a little bit earlier this year, and just very high energy, inspirational figure, and excited to see how some of his ideas might be able to help our clients and the world at large. So excited to get this out there.
Awesome. Well, hey, with that, let's go ahead and welcome Chad Jenkins to the show. Chad, thanks so much for carving some time out of your busy schedule to be on Advance Your Wealth with us.
Yeah, Ryan, excited to be here. It's great to see you again, Homer.
All right, well, I'm just going to jump in because I know this could be a lot to cover here, and want to make valuable use of your time as well. So we're definitely going to cover the idea of removing the film as well. But one of the things I really took from our conversation, as well as reading your book, that we can touch on as well, is this idea of a focus on collaboration, as a key way of helping the business owners and entrepreneurs you work with grow. And I think a lot of people, when they think about building their business, they think about it in terms of competition. They got to beat a competitor. They got to beat everybody else to, with a more of a finite pie that they've got to win the majority of. When did you kind of really see this idea of collaboration being a better way and a more powerful way to help businesses grow? And kind of how do you view that versus the idea of competition?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I feel like it's an awesome question. And as well, your interpretation is exactly right. Like most are thinking competition and not collaboration. But if you take it all the way back, when I say way back, all the way back, when we removed ourselves from the food chain, it was only because we began to entertain the idea of collaboration. We knew that when we bound together, we could outsmart the lions and the tigers. So it's funny how, as a human race, we actually had to leverage collaboration, and we still continue to do it today, but not in our businesses. So in looking at collaborations, you asked a question on when did it kind of really come to me, and that was around the age of 8 years old. I had to begin to look at things a little bit differently. So I grew up on a farm way out in South Carolina where I joke time moves backwards. And throughout the time that we even have today, you'll figure out that I don't really move as fast as farmers do, so to speak. Nothing against them whatsoever. Lovely people, and a lot of them are still wonderful friends, but I tend to move along at a little faster pace. So at 8 years old, I realized that. And I wondered to myself, how in the world am I ever going to get out of here? I have nothing. I have no resources, obviously no education at 8 years old, but I have a lot of natural curiosity. And what it made me start doing is looking at things, and I'll say this today, is authentic expression. So not what somebody puts the label on the outside of the jar, not what their title is, not even what their company is as their industry. But if you dig a little bit deeper, I feel like there's something much deeper, and you get to the point where you understand their unique value contribution. So yes, wealth management, awesome. There's a lot of folks in wealth management. They do not do it like you do. The time that we spent together, I know that what you're bringing to your clients is different than even some of my other friends in the industry that are across the country. It is unique. So digging down to that root, authentic expression that to me begins to attract or to be magnetizing to other things that once you get to their also understanding of their authentic expression, and by combining them together, you create new value or unique value, which to me is the absolute definition of collaboration. It's the unique value created from the combination of two or more people, places, and things. So that it started a long, long time ago, and I'm happy to say I've done it many times today for quite a few different industries. So it's being able to just understand what real value can be created through the combination of two sometimes seemingly very abstract things.
Can you think of Oh, sorry. Yeah. Can you think of, I'm sure there's been many in the businesses you've worked with. Can you think
Yeah.
of one or two, stories of owners you've worked with that, when you first met with them, maybe were not seeing it from a collaborative point of view,
Oh, yes.
and how you're able to kind of see that opportunity to bring another resource in and put those together and get,
Mhm.
the whole idea I think is, 1 + 1 is equals more than two when you collaborate.
It's 11. Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Yeah.
At
Yeah.
least in
So
my world, of course.
yeah, and I think, and I think that's interesting too to add into that to your answer is like I think most people think, oh, 1 + 1 = 3 is a great outcome, and your idea of 1 + 1 should be 11 or more, like much bigger, right? So
Much, much
maybe,
bigger.
yeah. So how have you seen that happen in some of the businesses you've worked with?
Yeah, sure. I own a pretty sizable cybersecurity and managed services firm. And I talked about earlier, the authentic expression, understanding that two things want to create value for the same exact, and I'll use hero target, which is Dan Sullivan's language. Who do you want your business to be a hero to?
Yeah.
So when I unpack this concept and I have, first and foremost, I have leadership teams in all of my opcos. I also treat them as a growth partner. So I lend them my personal unique value contribution, which is helping them grow exponentially through unconventional thinking. And that particular organization is a managed services firm or an IT company, as most would fully understand it, that focuses on cybersecurity. They happen to have quite a few folks quite a few organizations or entrepreneurs who are in and supply cybersecurity policies.
Hmm.
So they have the same hero target, right? My organization that I own wants to provide cybersecurity protection services to a small to medium sized business owner. And the organization that offers I'm sorry, not life insurance, sorry about that, cybersecurity insurance, they also want to offer that to the exact same hero target. So if you look at both of these organizations and their opportunity, what provides value for the hero target? Well, keep them protected, check. Less expensive on their cybersecurity insurance policy renewals,
Yeah.
check. But neither one of them can do that by themselves. It takes a collaboration. So working with that particular, I'm going to call it owner because he's a business owner of an organization that we happened on. We began to create something called Cyber Sense, and Sense is spelled CENTS.
Hmm.
So that's a combination between the insurance organization who wants to provide a much level higher in service and the organization that also wants to keep people protected. So coming together to create Cyber Sense, it's an assessment that is done for free to any prospects that the insurance organization has, with the understanding and the outcome expectation that once we go through this, kind of like a pre-home inspection. If you
Yeah.
ever go to sell your house, I would strongly suggest, and I do this at every time, I do a pre-home inspection, fix everything, and then whoever wants to buy the house is ready to give that full price offer. Why? Because they don't have anything to do.
Yeah.
Basically, it's like a gym that if you pay them, they're going to do the sit-ups and you get the six-pack. It's a pretty good idea, right?
Yeah.
So in this particular scenario, and understanding that's what provides the most value to the hero target, and understanding that both of them can collaborate to deliver that value, it seemed quite logical. Am happy to share that is also making both organizations grow. The insurance organizations that we partner with around the country offer the Cyber Sense. They're outpacing their competition 3-1.
Hmm.
And of course, whenever there's something that is found that needs to be remediated so that they can get the best possible premium renewal, we're there to help them. But it's all from not from a place of want to sell somebody, it's from a place of wanting to create value for them. But that's a pretty good example of one here recent over the last year.
And in your experience, I mean, it's probably why you are so valuable. And maybe you can maybe speak to this. Is this a concept that you find that most entrepreneurs or business owners can do on their own, or do you feel like, and probably a lot of the things you do is probably the same answer, but having an outside person that's not in the weeds every day in that silo to be able to kind of, that seems like a pretty obvious combination that would work if you hearing you tell that story.
Yes,
Um, what do you see, or why do you see it being such a challenge for so many entrepreneurs and business owners to see those things? Hindsight, 2020 looks like, yeah, that made a ton of sense. What is it that keeps owners from seeing these opportunities to collaborate?
I think you touched on it. We're so much inside of our own jar, and we're so in tune of focusing on our business, and rightfully so, we have to be to a certain degree, that we get enamored with providing a better business, not specifically a better value to those that we're here to serve. So, and you touched on it a little bit at the intro, removing the film. I see everyone's business a lot more vibrant and 10x bigger than they are. So
Yeah.
starting there, I wanted to create a way that others could be empowered to do it themselves. And that's where Remove the Film began to start. And it's been expanded to broken down into 3 different types of friction fuel that every business owner was afflicted by today, all 3 of them.
Yeah.
And so that it as its root empowers other people to do what I just shared with you. Is focusing on the frictions that folks are feeling today.
Well, that's perfect. As the next question I was going to go into was this concept of removing the film. And, again, in reading your book and talking with you, such a framing of it, I think, is just great. And because all of us have experienced peeling back the film off of a camera or
like
something else.
Or a new iPhone. That's right.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa, that looks a lot better. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or the GPS in our vehicle. I had one recently, and my daughter's with me. And of course, every one of them now have a big 17-inch screen, or this one has about a 30-inch screen in the middle, and it's huge. But whenever you peel that plastic off, he's like, whoa, that's at least 10 times better. Think of your business that way. And the good thing is, if we're listening, so God gave us 4 inputs and 1 output. I have just notoriously always used them proportionately. That is not the case on this podcast because it is my responsibility to do some of the talking. But in business, I was very fortunate to grow up with my father, who, of course, was 20 plus years my senior. Therefore, in the South, you always keep your mouth shut and obey your elders, respect your elders. I took it to heart. I kept my mouth shut, but I'm being naturally curious. I was a sponge, and I just continuously ask questions. So applicable to how can other business owners or entrepreneurs most specifically do this themselves and create and find these collaborations? There's a little bit of a process, so I'll kind of step through it. In understanding now there are 3 different types of frictions that can be empowering. The very first one, just like if you pull up to a gas station and there's premium fuel, to me, there's premium friction fuel. And that's when you're in tune so well with your hero target and your industry that you can predict frictions that are going to affect them in the future. If you're listening to those frictions and naturally curious to identify them, embrace them, run it through a couple other processes that we've created, you then can begin to be an industry leader. And you're basically creating an industry of one. Because most of the others are worried about the difference in the rates or the difference in finance packages or supply chain or whatever it might be. And those are all very valid things to be concerned with. I like to be focused on the one who writes the checks. Yeah. Those are their hero targets, right? So a premium friction, you're really, really in tune. Those are a little harder, certainly. And then the second one is a mid-grade friction, just like at the gas station. So if you think about times in which there's been a shortage on gas, there's always mid-grade until they run completely out, right? You got the guys who want the cheapest price, and you got the ones who require premium. And the one in the middle, which if you apply it to frictions, these are the ones that come to you bountifully. They give them away for free. Pretty much, I would assume, everyone who's on the call today received a text message this morning, or is the first email that you found or walked into, or you might have had one of those old things, I think it's calling a telephone call. And whenever you picked up the phone, you cringed. And it was somebody on your team discussing a complaint, whether it be from internal, a team member, because it works both ways, or external, from a client. And us as visionaries, these things are constantly coming. I mentioned that. These are mid-grade frictions. They come in bountiful all day long in those 3 different formats. If we take one big step back or create a mechanism, now with Chat GPT, there's a lot of opportunities for us to find trending and patterns in the information. But if you just create a way to capture those frictions, and it could be something as simple as creating a shared mailbox. I assume most of us have Google or 365, frictions at mycompanyname.com. And when something comes through to you as the visionary, forward it in. Have your strategic assistant once a week go through, put all those in Chat GPT and just ask for trending. This is not a bunch of time you have to invest yourself. Yeah. Now, if for the organizations that are running on EOS and understand what an IDS or a level 10 meeting is, which I assume most of us do in this day and age, thank you, Gino Wickman, on your IDS, have those frictions that have been identified that have been coming through your organization all week long and have real conversations about it. So that'd be the second one and the most bountiful one. And then the third one we're all intimately familiar with. That's whenever you look at your P&L or you look at your sales or your pipeline and we're down by 5 or 10 or 20%. So if you understand exactly where we are currently, that is the result of not paying attention to the first 2, right? So a premium friction fuel from 2 years ago was something that was going to affect our hero targets, you could see and smell a change or a shift in the market or the industry or the world. Then 9 months ago, we were having a bountiful amount of complaints coming from our hero targets, current clients or prospect clients. We weren't winning deals. Now I receive my financials and you see the result of it. So this is your hair on fire type of friction. It is regular friction and you're having to react from it. But hopefully just that unpacking, I know it's a short time, but hopefully that unpacking of the 3 different types, people can relate to all those in their business.
And so how does this concept of removing the film, whether it's a business owner's ability to do it on their own or working with a guide like yourself and your team to do this, I know you've given a little bit of examples of maybe how you take those and turn them from challenges maybe into opportunities, but what have been some examples, directly that you've seen in some of the businesses you work with where someone's been able to identify maybe even one of those, premium grade
Yes,
opportunities,
the good ones, the sexy
and
ones, if you will.
yeah,
Yeah.
give me an example of what that looks
I
like.
can, I
With
can
some
give you one. This has been from quite a few years ago, but it still rings true. And a lot of us can relate to the friction that was causing or being caused. This is early in the 2000s. I recognized at that time, and I owned this organization. I'd never been in the wireless industry at all, but I was. You know why? Because I knew the value that was created by this one particular mobile wireless device. But in that industry, I recognized a friction because I had corporate clients, of course, and they had many of these devices. And at that time, all of us who have cell phones probably remember this. You got a surprise bill, right? It's kind of like your data carrier, your internet provider at home. You'll watch a TV. They literally are marketing to prospects for a much less cheaper rate than what you're paying. You may have even gotten the bill today. But think about that in the early days of wireless. So what I recognize is everybody's bill was messed up.
Yeah.
And if you just look at the capabilities or the resources that I had at my fingertips, well, by default, all of my team members had to understand what the new rate plans were. And whenever someone got a surprise bill, guess who got the call? Right? So they're fielding phone calls, and there just wasn't a solution in the industry at that time. So taking a big step back and looking at the trending and the patterns and understanding how you create value, I created a new service for that particular organization at that time. We eventually spun it out because it got so big, but it was wireless management. So in essence, if you buy your phones here, we do offer an additional premium service where we'll make sure your bill is right. And if it's not right, we'll get on the phone with customer service and figure it out. And when they come out with new rate plans, we're going to understand your patterns of usage of your phones for your 10 phones or one very national home builder. We had all of the accounts across the Southeast. There's 26,000 phones on one account.
Oh.
We're going to make sure the bill is right. It saved millions of dollars. Now, because the value proposition to the same hero target, what did it make my wireless company do? Ultimately, who would you like to buy your phone from? The guy's going to make sure your bill's right and you never have to sit on hold again or run the risk of just seeing the bill when it comes in and trying to keep up with these rate plans. So that particular business ran just over a few years to over 20 million a year in recurring. And it's what ultimately drove me to starting a software business because it was just scaling too fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
That's
a fun one.
amazing. Yeah,
The
that's an
thing is,
amazing story.
these exist in industries all over. It's just, are we listening to the frictions? Or are we running away from them? And I find
Yeah.
that most, when I get engaged with them, they have all of the knowledge. They're aware of these frictions, but there's never been a mechanism for them to properly prioritize them and to embrace them to be able to shift trends in their industry.
Yeah, and I remember that story. Just thinking of the book that you just recently wrote. Just Out of Zero,
Yes.
which covered these concepts we were speaking to, but also like the main theme is this idea of just out of zero. So how does that as an overriding concept drive what you do and your thinking, and obviously it incorporates these other areas that we've mentioned as well. But tell me about that idea. That's a big concept as well, like a 10x
No problem.
concept.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier leveraging friction fuel to identify ways that you can remove the film on your industry, which is friction identification, leverage the market. Well, how are we going to leverage the market? In the example that I gave, there was a commonality, right? The market was everybody had this affliction. They're all having this particular friction. But in today's world, when you identify the bountiful amount of frictions in your business, I needed a mechanism to correctly prioritize that. So the leveraging the market piece just add a zero was quite helpful. And the just add a zero will absolutely cause unconventional thinking. So if you have all these frictions identified and you're understanding, or you want to understand, how big of an impact can we make? And also, how are we going to solve this? You might consider just adding a zero. Most people, and is quite logical, will want to add the zero to the back. They want to make, if they're $1 million organization, they want to make 10. If they're 10, they want to make 100. If they're making $10 million in EBITDA a year, they want to make 100. Makes a lot of sense. I would encourage you to consider putting the zero at the beginning. So if this current state were to drop by a magnifold of 10, or we would increase it. It works both ways, but I can tell you, adding the zero to the beginning is quite impactful. And I'll walk through a scenario of where I've used that in the past. There's an organization that I was engaged with around 2015. And at that time, they had 10 folks in their sales team, or their sales department. 6 of them were really killing it. 4 were really not. They were going to meetings. They had a pipeline, but the pipeline really wasn't moving. And in that particular leadership meeting, it's very clearly obvious. Everyone was wanting to solve for the 4. And sometimes we're just not asking the right question, to be honest. And this particular entrepreneur did consider, hey, let's just ask one particular question. How are we going? Because you've got investment in all this leadership, all this brain power, all this experience in your industry sitting around the table. And we're literally trying to solve for the most obvious thing that anybody in the organization could solve for. Get rid of the 4, right? This is not rocket science. And I would encourage you to potentially consider adding a zero. That particular question was, how would we reach our goals? How would we even exceed our goals if we added a zero to the front of our current sales team members? Which means we would go from 10 down to 1. It's really hard to do what I just did. Be quiet. Right? Just be really, really quiet when you ask that question, because inevitably you're leveraging what human brains do by default. Everyone's in the industry. They've been in these meetings for years. The very first thing that comes to their mind is, this guy crazy? There's no way we could ever do this because of X and Y and Z and all the other letters in the alphabet. And I would encourage you just to embrace that. Grab a whiteboard and just write down everything that everyone can come up with, because it's literally gold. When they're finished, and try to draw it all out of them, everything, you may consider leveraging the power of one word, which is unless. To all those bullet points that you just put up on this whiteboard, step up there and write unless. And then the second portion of trying to be quiet is even harder as a leader, because you've resolved quite a few things that would be unless we do this and the outcome. But you want them to be able to embrace it, and you want this big outcome, this potentially industry shifting new thing that you're going to bring. You want it to be part of everyone's idea. So just be very, very silent and quiet. What comes out on the right side of unless is a lot of times the building blocks to remove your competition and reduce any compression on margin that you ever thought. Now, keep in mind, I did not say we wanted to fire 9 people in the sales team. I didn't. I'm just saying, how would we use our brains to fullest capacity that we've given and that we've been given to come up with some really interesting stuff? So what came out on the right side of that whiteboard was a lot. It was awesome as well. I'm happy to report that particular organization implemented 6 out of the 12 things that came out during just that one question. They prioritized that friction. They ended up taking the 4 people who were trained. They've already made a heck of an investment. These guys are onboarded. And what they found out was the 6 people could actually sell a lot more, but they were drowning. And you could take the 4 and just repurpose them, which of course got them free training, because now they're engaged with somebody who's a high performer. They doubled their sales goal for that year in 7 months.
It's amazing. That's a great story on that. So I know a lot of the work you do is around growing, like significant exponential growth. Yes. In order to be able to do that, you got to be in business and survive, and be able to see some of the dangers and threats coming. Because you're so involved in so many businesses, and I think the work you do is outstanding. As you're helping and having these types of meetings, I think just on the other side of it, are there any particular major dangers or threats that you see out there that most business owners are currently facing? And if maybe from a macro perspective that you see, like all businesses are missing, or if it's more specific, like to a particular business or two you work with, but just things that you see most common that businesses are missing that could threaten their ability to persist.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Two things come immediately to mind. The last one applicable to how you implement this is collaboration, the growth through collaboration. So a lot of times what I'm absolutely witnessing, and it's not recent, and we talked about a little bit earlier in the call, is just not even considering that as a potential growth strategy when we come up with something that's going to be industry impactful or separate us from our competition. And oftentimes the root of that, as I've tracked backwards, is we don't have the budget, we can't launch that marketing campaign, we can't expand manufacturing, and then just come up with all these reasons that we can't. And I would encourage and also challenge, if you are the visionary of your organization and you've come up with this new idea that can be really impactful to your organization, and if you're using frictions, obviously it can come from anybody in your organization,
Yep.
but you see that there's an impediment. Now, if you're around me very long, you will hear me say the obstacle is the way and collaboration is the way through it. So the obstacle is the way, of course, for most of us who probably read the book, Ryan Holiday's a wonderful book,
Yep.
but it left me with how do you, and then so that what are we going to do next? And it came really clear to be collaboration being the way through it. So us as visionaries understand that whatever this is we're about to embark upon is going to create hypothetically $10 million of revenue. And let's say you have a margin of net 20, so it's $2 million. For all these impediments that you have for really embracing and beginning to create this competitive advantage, how much of that 2 million would you actually share with somebody who could create it for you? Who would do the
Yeah.
sit-ups and you get the six pack? How much would you share of that $2 million? And it's not even really considered. And I deal with, and I appreciate you mentioned that, I deal with organizations on almost every continent now. But there's definitely a commonality that we don't even consider this. And it can be so freeing. There's one prerequisite to make this a very viable strategy, and that is being very transparent and being on the exact same page with your collaboration partner of what success looks like and how fast are we going to know it. And I'll put
Yep.
that in context. Let's say that I've come up with this excellent idea. We've got to get this big marketing campaign, and we don't have the budget for this. But I know someone who's very, very confident in their ability to create the marketing outcomes. Well, we'll take that hypothetical strategy or outcome, which is $10 million of revenue, $2 million of profit. And if I were to engage this marketing firm, let's say that they wanted $250,000 to create this outcome. And I'd say, that's awesome. I'll tell you what, I am really confident what I do. And you seem to be very confident what you do. If you're that confident, and you've already shown me, it says right here on your proposal that in 60 days, I'm going to start getting this outcome. And if you're good with it, I tell you what, every time I get that outcome, I've already done the math and I would pay you the 250. But if you do the math my way, I'm actually going to pay you 375. And in 3 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever they said they can start creating this outcome from, here's how we're going to measure success. The second somebody signs up, I'm going to give you 200 or 2,000 or whatever your matrix happens to be, so that if they're able to produce the outcome that they projected, they make a whole lot more money. Two things happen whenever you consider this strategy. First, you never have to fire anybody.
Yeah.
Right? They're either producing the outcome or they're not. And if they said 3 weeks or 3 months, you let it get to 4 weeks or 4 months. They're making the call saying, look, no mas, I can't do this anymore. You're right. You can't do it anymore. But we've learned a lot along the way. And what we may have learned is that particular collaboration partner is really, really good at one thing. He's just not good at exactly what produces the outcome. But you still haven't spent a whole bunch of money. Yeah. And if it does work, guess what you now have? A collaboration partner for life.
Yeah.
Right? It's very similar to running from the lions and tigers way back when. If somebody saved you and you didn't get eaten by the tiger, that was a lifelong bond. You can create those in your business considering collaboration as a growth strategy.
I love that for a couple of reasons. One, and I found in my businesses, I'm big on collaboration, and it's amazing how many business owners, other advisors, professionals would much rather have 100% of potentially nothing than some share of a much, much bigger number. And then on that note you just defined, having everybody have skin in the game, I think is such a critical part of that, right? So this, marketing firm, consultants, whatever you might say, that have these, targets or dollars that they're going to charge you to get an outcome, do they really have skin in the game? Are they going to get that dollar whether they get the outcome or not? And if they're not willing to put some skin in the game themselves on the upside, are they really, if you want real growth, exponential growth, are they really the right partner for you?
Think of the last person that you really needed in your business, and then consider that person. Finding that person is the absolute best on the planet. That if you could just do business with them, they would create the outcome. So if they typically have a rate card, and we all do, of what you would sell those services for, but you would consider doubling their rate card or 1.6 times. If they're really good and they produce those results, what's the probability of them walking away from a lot more margin? Now, if you're dealing with Joey down the street, that's a friend of the family's, or somebody that you just happened to meet at the barbecue, was a holiday yesterday in the US, that person probably didn't have the interest like we just talked about. But the person that can actually create the outcome, that is very confident in what they're doing, would absolutely like to get a little bit more for what they're putting forward today versus just the regular cost of whatever they're charging. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, and as well, just not to get too far down the semantics, but I'll put something in frame for you. If you engage with somebody today and you're selling a product or service, unless you charge for it 100% on the front, what's the probability you getting that invoice out very, very timely? Okay, it's going to go out and you're going to perform the service. You're going to bill them at the end of the month. Maybe you build a little bit on the front. Well, what's your terms? Is it net 15 or is it net 30? Now take that cycle that's only applicable to you of when you would actually get paid for the product or service that you're deploying. And you remember I said a prereq for these growth collaborations, which I've fully defined now, is being transparent with what success looks like and how early in the game we're going to be able to interpret it. And exactly when it starts happening, I'm going to start paying you. Get all that out on the front. What you'll typically find, and I found this, obviously it's not the first one I've ever done. What you'll typically find is by the time you would have conventionally billed them and gotten paid for it, you're already getting paid.
Yeah.
So it's not that appreciably different. It's just why we become accustomed to working in these conventions that they said is the right way to do business. I didn't grow up that way. I had to figure it out on my own to figure out how I could create value with what I had at the time where I was, and I had to do what I could. And so this is what I've come up with. It's been empowering organizations for a long, long time now.
I love it. As we kind of wrap, you mentioned like hero target and how important that is to know who that is. So for you, what's a hero target look like for you? And for those, entrepreneurs or business owners that are, watching today that, love the concepts that we're discussing and would say, hey, I'd love to have a chat with Chad, and maybe there's collaborations that I can learn about. Yeah. Who's your hero target, and how can, those that are watching maybe find more out about what you do?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. My hero target is a $1 to $10 million entrepreneur who's frustrated with the returns they're getting out of what they're putting effort in. So they might have been in the industry for a long time. They're afflicted by margin compression or supply chain or whatever, fill in the blank. So those guys who are a little bit frustrated with the returns, and they'd really just like to add a zero.
Yeah, that's great. And what would be the best way? Is SeedSpark? Is that the best way to get started?
Yeah, I appreciate that. SeedSpark.com and SeedSpark.com is obviously very easy. Contact us from there. Quite active on LinkedIn. That's another particular place. And any of those two outlets are really easy.
Great. I definitely highly encourage anyone that watches today also pick up the book. We'll put a link for it when this gets posted. Easy read. Very, a lot of stories you told are in there as well, but also just very meaningful in terms of the concepts and application to them. So just really appreciated that as well.
Thanks very much, Homer. I appreciate that. And Ryan, I really appreciated the time. Thanks for having me on today.
Of course, guys, we appreciate you both. And folks, as always, we want to take a moment and thank you for stopping by and spending some time with us on the podcast today. If you learned a thing or two, you benefited from the conversation with Chad, I know I did, make sure you hit that subscribe button on whichever platform you checked us out on today so that you don't miss out on any future conversations between whether it be Homer or myself, and we unpack different wealth management concepts, or we welcome on another esteemed guest like Chad. These episodes are ultimately meant for you to benefit your financial world in some way, shape, or form. And by subscribing, you won't miss out on any of that good stuff. Before Homer and Chad, I'm Ryan. We're going to go ahead and say so long now. But again, we appreciate you stopping by and being with us on Advance Your Wealth.